And please refresh your pages. And we are up and running. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily, and I'm the community manager of 2 Diabetes, working with Diabetes Hands Foundation. And we are here today for a live interview that is culminating the November Yes Salud campaign, which has been a collaboration between Diabetes Hands Foundation, our communities, 2 Diabetes and Estudiabetes in Spanish, and USAGov. And I am going to kick this over to Victoria, who has been my collaborator at USAGov, to talk a little bit about what they do.
Thanks so much, Emily. What a great introduction to a really awesome campaign. Hello, my name is Victoria Wales, and I'm part of the USAGov team. We're proud to collaborate with you all, the Diabetes Hands Foundation, both English and in Spanish, and in this effort to raise public awareness about living with diabetes in the United States. One of the things that we were hoping that we could share with you is, who we are, a little bit more about us. USAGov is a federal program that guides the public to tips and tools in English and in Spanish from hundreds of government agencies, departments, and programs. We help you find answers you can trust about government information and services online, by phone, email, or chat, and in print and in social media. So welcome to the Yes Salud chat.
Fantastic. Thank you, Victoria. And now, so what the plan is for today's interview is you guys, sorry, I have some background noise. You guys, our audience, have been submitting questions for about the last month as part of the Yes Salud campaign, questions that you have relating to diabetes, and we've been collecting those questions. And now we have a couple of experts online with us, and we're going to go through your questions and answer them. So let's start with you. We have Marina Chaparro joining us. Marina, the camera is on you. Would you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi guys, I'm so happy to be with you and answering all your questions, nutrition, non-nutrition. As you said, I'm one of the experts. I'm a certified diabetes educator and registered dietitian nutritionist. I currently reside in Florida, and I have a private practice called NutriChicos, where I focus mostly on kids, but I'm also a national spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So happy to be here answering tons of questions, because I know diabetes, especially November, was Diabetes Awareness Month, and we all need to learn a little bit more about diabetes.
Absolutely. And now, for our second guest today, we have Lorena Drago, also joining us. Hi, Lorena. The camera is on you. Please tell us who you are.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to share with all of you. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist and certified diabetes educator in New York. I oversee several programs, one of them a pre-diabetes program. And one of the areas that I truly enjoy is the multicultural aspects of nutrition and diabetes management.
Fantastic. So we received a slew of questions through this campaign. So clearly, I think that we've kind of hit on a need, which is for folks to be able to just sort of throw out, here's something I've been wondering about, or that I'm concerned about relating to diabetes. Here's something I don't understand. And so I've tried to collate the questions into sort of a cohesive list. Unfortunately, we will not be able to answer every single question today, and I apologize to those who submitted questions. If we don't get to answer yours, I'm very sorry, but we're going to do our very best. And so first off, our first question, we're starting with Diabetes 101. What is diabetes? We have type 1, type 2, there's pre-diabetes. A lot of folks are really confused about what are these different things. So let's start with you, Marina. How about you can handle what is type 1, and then we'll kick type 2 to Lorena.
Well, and I just want to say, right, when we hear the word diabetes, it brings up a lot of different emotions to different people. And there's different types, as you said, of diabetes or pre-diabetes. So talking first about type 1 diabetes, we used to thought it was mostly in kids, also called juvenile diabetes, but now it's really not the case. It's just type 1. So what that means is that the body really doesn't produce any insulin, so it's an autoimmune disease that for some reason, we still don't know why, our own body just doesn't produce and destroy its own insulin. So in order for us, because I'm also a type 1, we need insulin in order to survive. So that's usually the difference between type 1 and I imagine Lorena, my dear friend, can explain to us what type 2 diabetes would be.
Absolutely. Lorena, type 2.
Yes. So type 2, and that is the adult diabetes. About 90% of people that are diagnosed with diabetes are diagnosed with type 2. And I went like this, quote unquote, because it is no longer a condition that presents itself in adults, but also we are seeing children with type 2 as well. So we have 90% of people with diabetes with type 2 and 10% with type 1 approximately. And that is when insulin may be produced, but it's not produced in sufficient quantities, and also it is not used correctly by the body. Therefore, blood sugar levels start to increase.
All right. So the next piece is what are the symptoms of each type of diabetes? And Marina, how about you cover type 1?
And so in type 1, it's really, there's a big awareness of really recognizing the symptoms because like I said, this is an autoimmune condition. It happens really quickly. And the symptoms are more rapid onset, whereas type 2, I mean, there's a big population that could even have prediabetes or diabetes and not know of it. So one of the first ones that we know of is weight loss, and what we see is unintended weight loss, right? So you've been eating like crazy, you haven't really been exercising, yet you're still losing weight. That would be a little concerning. You would have a lot of thirst, right? An increase in thirst that you just, no matter how much water you take, you're still thirsty. And at the same token, you're going to the bathroom a lot, so frequent urination. People might have some symptoms of blurry vision. They might see some spots here and there, maybe a lot of tiredness or just really, really tired, and even in some cases, some nausea. Like I said, a difference, Lorena was saying 90%. In type 1s, the incidence is much less. It's about 5 to 10% of the total population have type 1, and the majority is in either kids or adolescents. So especially it's important for any parents that are listening to listen to these symptoms because they could potentially save your child's life if he were to be diagnosed.
And I also wanted to add that many times there are no symptoms for people with type 2 diabetes. And the diagnosis is pretty much incidental. A person might not be feeling well, but there are no specific symptoms, or simply they are just either going to the doctor for a checkup, and during a routine blood test, they discover that their blood sugar levels are elevated. So the most important advice here is that only a blood test will most definitely be the decisive factor, the diagnostic factor when it comes to diabetes.
So I mentioned a few minutes ago that there's also something called pre-diabetes, and I think there's a lot of confusion and just lack of information about exactly what it means to have pre-diabetes. So let's talk a moment about that. What is pre-diabetes and how is it diagnosed? And let's have you handle that one, Marina.
Yeah. So, well, pre-diabetes is that condition in which the blood sugar levels are elevated, but they are not high enough to be called diabetes. So just to throw in a little bit of numbers, when someone is diagnosed with diabetes, blood sugar levels are over 125. And that is fasting, which means 8 hours without eating or drinking any foods. When someone has prediabetes, the blood sugar levels are between 100 and 125. So it is high enough that it requires action. But the good news is that 58% of people that actually were diagnosed with prediabetes in a very large study with modest weight loss, and I'm talking about 10% of weight loss. So someone who weighs 200 pounds, roughly 20 pounds weight loss, and engaging in physical activity approximately 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, they were able to actually reduce their blood sugar levels within the normal ranges. So that is another reason why testing is so important, because if you are at the pre-diabetes stage, that means that there is something that you can do about it, and it is not something that is drastic in changes. So better eating and more moving.
Yeah, just to even add, this is kind of what I like to call the call to action, or even the window of opportunity, because as Lorena said, they're not quite high enough to be considered diabetes, and this is where we could definitely do a lot of improvement, right? So this is going to be, most people tend to just maybe dismiss it, and I have a little bit of sugar in my body, not really high enough, it's not really diabetes, but the opposite, right? This is where our opportunity is golden, because by losing weight, by being more active, you can drastically change and even delay the onset of type 2 diabetes even occurring. So this is really something that we want the population to understand, that it's not just a little bit of high blood glucose. This is a little call to action and a red flag that this is our moment to change.
Wow. So what are the risk factors for diabetes? What are the things that might make people more predisposed to it or make people more at risk of developing it? And I'll have you do that one, Marina.
So we know that race is also a factor, right? So American Indians or Pima Indians, African Americans, and Hispanic or Latino have a higher likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes. But we also know that 80% of the people that also have type 2 diabetes are overweight. So being overweight is a huge risk factor, along with maybe having other conditions, other metabolic conditions like high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, along with, like I said, weight gain, and just being sedentary, right? Those are all just adding things and putting things that could put you at risk for, in the future, developing diabetes. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but family history also matters, right? So if your mom, your dad, your siblings have type 2 diabetes, then we really want to be talking to our doctor, having those annual checkups, and knowing what your numbers are. Like Lorena said, really the best way of knowing is going to be through blood work.
Right. Very important. Very important that we all stay on top of these things too, that we see doctors and that we get our checkups and just make sure that nothing is sneaking up on us. So here's a question that we got a lot in collecting questions from the general public for this talk, and it is, how can I cure diabetes? Which it's a really interesting question with, in a way, a little bit of a complicated answer. And Lorena, I would love for you to answer this one. Is there a cure for any type of diabetes, or can you reverse it? Can you, a lot of people use the terminology beat diabetes, and what would that mean? And hang on a sec, because I noticed that we're having some audio issues with Lorena's line right now, so actually, Lorena, let's see. Talk for a moment. Let me see if I can fix, we have an audio issue for you. Nope, so let's give this instead. Let's give this question to Marina, and in the meantime, Lorena.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. There we go. Okay. There we go. Great.
Perfect. Okay, so basically, is there a cure? And right now, no. And I know that it is very important to underscore that, because not very recently, in many of the diabetes communities that I participate in, there was this information about a vaccine, a cure, etc. And every so often, these cures come up about what you said, beating diabetes, the cure for diabetes, and they're very misleading. The only thing that perhaps many times people have asked me is with bariatric surgery and type 2 diabetes. And in many people that have diabetes and have undergone bariatric surgery, whether it's the sleeve or bypass surgery, they have experienced a remission. And I am going to not call it a cure, but a remission of symptoms. So that could be that many times people that were using insulin as treatment or any other hypoglycemic agents have found that they no longer require to use them and their blood sugar levels are within a healthier range. Nevertheless, follow-up is still very important. So I would say that that is the only close thing that I have seen, at least with type 2s, which is mostly the population that I work with. So beware of all those articles or information about curing diabetes.
And I mean, I can add for the type 1 community, there's also, like you said, right, everybody, we're all focusing on a cure for diabetes, and there's actually millions of dollars that are currently going through clinical research to really find out the mechanisms of why does type 1 occur. There's definitely a lot of advancements in terms of the treatment, right? So we came a long way from just injections and the delivery of insulin to maybe insulin pumps to continuous glucose monitors. Now we're hearing a lot more about the closed loop system or the dual hormone, which again are not cures, but they're a more advanced treatment that I love it when I heard a presenter said that the cure of diabetes happens when there's no burden, right? We really don't have to do much. And I think this is the new advances are requiring less human intervention and are allowing for technology to kind of take its role of the pancreas or different organs. So we're not there yet in terms of type 1, but there's a lot of hope that could go along with it. But we're flourishing with diabetes. We're not just coping with diabetes, but I like to use the term with flourishing because life is completely doable, and this is something that we can live with and happily.
Absolutely, and I want to interject sort of a blanket question here. Nobody asked this question specifically, but a lot of people ask this question in a sort of roundabout manner, and that is, can diabetes be managed? A lot of folks find it really difficult. Is it manageable? And I'm going to give that one back to you, Marina.
Yes. Yes, no doubt. I'm not even going to blink at it. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the whole goal of your providers, your educators, your nutrition experts, is to help you understand how your body reacts to different foods, to different exercising, to different lifestyle component, and make sure that those numbers are within reach, right? So it is absolutely doable and it's absolutely manageable. It's a self-management condition. So that's where the education comes along, because we as the patients are the ones that are going to understand our body even more. So it happens over time. It's not easy, but absolutely yes. And if you're noticing that you're having a hard time controlling those numbers, and a normal for you could be a 200-300 blood sugar, I would say let's go back to the drawing board. Let's go back to the educator and find out, what are your barriers? What's the hardest thing for you? And let's find a way of changing that.
Fantastic. I love that answer. As a fellow type 1, I also believe, of course, diabetes is a manageable condition, and that's what is incumbent upon us to do, is do our best to manage it. So moving on to a next sort of category of questions. I have a category of questions around testing and treatment, and the first one, and I want to give this one to you, Lorena, is what is an A1C test? A lot of people, I think especially folks who have been told that they have prediabetes or might have prediabetes, have been given a number that is called their A1C. And what does that number mean? What is that test?
Okay, so a few things to remember. Your A1C is correlated to your blood sugar levels. So many of you are testing your blood sugar levels at home, and you find these numbers. They can fluctuate, 120, 140, 150, etc. And when you go to the doctor and you have this test, also known as hemoglobin A1C, what they're actually doing is they're testing the amount of sugar that pretty much sticks to your red blood cells. And those cells live in our bodies for about 2 to 3 months. So by looking at these red blood cells living in your body, the higher your blood sugar levels, the more this sugar sticks to these red blood cells, and that's what it's being measured. And it's being measured in percentages. Therefore, you're going to hear numbers such as 6, 7, 8, and so on. So how does that correlate with your blood sugar levels at home? Well, a level of 7 means that approximately for the past 2 to 3 months, your blood sugar levels have been around 150. For every point, that is usually 30 points more. So that means that a 7 is around 150, an 8 is about 180, and so on. So good control is defined as a blood sugar levels, an A1C of around 7. That could be a little higher or a little lower depending on each individual and what your medical team has determined for you. So it's just a measure of how well controlled your diabetes is.
So sorry, can I steal an order? Oh, no.
In relationship to your blood sugar levels that you're probably much more familiar. So knowing what that number means is very important.
Absolutely. So another question relating to tests and medications. We had a question. What is insulin? What does insulin do? Why do some people need it and some people not need it? Let's have you do that one, Marina.
So insulin is a hormone. It's a natural hormone that most humans, except a few of us that are type 1, would produce in our body, and it's made by the pancreas. And so its job is to really bring that glucose from the cells into the body, right? So it's kind of like the key that opens that door and allows that energy to go through, right? So it's a hormone that allows for growth, among other things. And so especially when we're insulin deficient, that's when we would tend to lose weight. That's what one of the symptoms was, because that energy really is stuck in really the blood, and it can't really pass through, and that's why our blood sugars are really, really high. Insulin is again needed, and insulin needed for type 1 individuals because they do not produce it. However, in type 2, it depends on each individual, right? We have this notion that insulin is only for type 1, or insulin could be a really, really bad thing. And it's not, right? It's a natural hormone that the body produces. So it is, thank God it was produced, and we're grateful because of this we have better numbers and better lifespan. So type 2 people might use insulin depending on the control. Especially if they've had diabetes for a really long time. Maybe they're not producing as much insulin, and that's why they've tried different combinations of medication, and insulin is just the better treatment. So, like I said, everybody is different, right? People with type 2, some might be on oral medication, some might be on diet, others simply on exercise or a combination, and others might need on insulin. The whole point here is everybody's treatment is different, but what is the end result? So what is your control based on your individual treatment? That's really what we care about.
Absolutely.
Marina, I just wanted to add something, Emily, and that I want to underscore something that Marina said, and that is that insulin is the hormone that is produced in the body by all of us. So replacing insulin, it's really replacing what our bodies can no longer do. And it is not the last resort. And I know that many individuals, unfortunately, have been taught that if they do not follow their medical plan, they will end up using insulin. And that has created a, I would say, a panic among many individuals with diabetes, thinking that things are getting much worse and that in many cases that they shouldn't even use insulin because of detrimental effects. So I just want to say insulin is life, and that's how it should be viewed.
I love that, and I really love that you added that and underscored it, Lorena, because we definitely hear on the 2 Diabetes community that a lot of our members who have type 2 have been told by their medical providers, you know, if you don't shape up and start eating differently or exercising more, then I'm going to have to put you on insulin. And it's held over people sometimes as if it's almost a punishment or a sign that you have failed at something. And as you say, that is absolutely not the case. We absolutely reject that notion completely. So let's move on to now a question, as long as we're talking about type 2, a question about metformin, which is a medication that is an oral medication very commonly prescribed to people who have type 2. And Lorena, let me give that one to you. What is metformin and who needs to take it?
Well, metformin is perhaps the most common medication for people with type 2 diabetes. It's pretty much what I see in practice as the first line of therapy. And metformin has been around for a while, and what it does is it lowers blood sugar levels. And since I had the A1C question about dropping that A1C levels, it roughly will drop it between 1.5 to 2 points on average. So it's also a pretty good drug that it's an oral medication, and what it does is it helps to lower blood sugar levels by decreasing the amount of glucose that is released by the liver where it has been stored, therefore managing those numbers, and then also having some of our cells use the insulin more effectively. So that's what metformin does.
And we had a couple of people ask if there's a way to wean yourself off of metformin, or if there's potentially a natural substitute or a dietary substitute for metformin. I think for some people don't like to take medications, and they feel like, I don't want to be dependent on a medication for the rest of my life, and I don't want to put something in my body that is chemical or that I don't really understand. What would you say about those things, Marina?
Like you said, right, I think if you don't like taking medications, just the concept of taking medications could be a little bit hard. But metformin has been around for a while. It's really been studied, and in fact, it's really successful. Even it promotes some type of weight loss, or it's not gonna, let's say, you're not gonna gain any weight. So on that aspect, it definitely has some positive effects. Could we wean off of that medication? Well, it all depends on if you're doing other things along with taking your medication that you weren't taking before. So for example, if you're now exercising a lot more than you were before, if you're now engaging in healthier habits, you're eating better, you're having more salads, that could potentially, you might be able to use less of the metformin, all depending on what your numbers are and your consultation with your doctor. However, the moment that you stop maybe engaging in those healthier lifestyle factors, those blood sugars will eventually start rising again. So really, I want to underscore that this medication is really aimed to help sometimes the natural resistance that is present in type 2 diabetes, that sometimes even with exercise and diet could be hard to change. However, we do notice that people that are doing greater changes and they're seeing positive effects in their blood sugars, they could temporarily be weaned off. I don't know if entirely. Again, it depends. But eventually they might need to go back on it, just because their insulin is their pancreas is really not producing enough insulin as it was.
Yeah. And I also want to add the second part, Emily, that you had asked, because that question I do get asked a lot, and that is, can I take something else to replace the medication that I am taking? And the answer is, it's very dicey to say that, and that is because certain foods, and I'm going to name a few that have hypoglycemic or lower blood sugar levels, such as fenugreek and nopal, or the prickly cactus that people have used, or uh, bitter melon, etc., and other types of foods. What we don't know is how much you need to take of that specific food in order to produce similar blood sugar reducing effects as a medication. Every time that a person takes metformin, certain milligrams, we know that the effect is going to be very similar because we know exactly what's in that capsule. When someone is taking nopal, for example, there might be some blood sugar decrease, but you have to take the nopal every single day in order to sustain that level. And if you take less or more, we don't know how it's going to affect. So it might just lower it a little bit, or sometimes it might lower it a lot. So that lack of consistency makes it very difficult for a healthcare professional to actually say, discharge all of your medications and start taking cactus, because that is going to lower your blood sugar levels. So that's one of the concerns that I usually have. And there are not so many studies, and some of them might be contradictory. So that makes it so difficult for us to have that standardized dose and the consistency.
That is a perfect segue into our next group of questions, which are about diet. What should we eat? We got so many questions about what should people with diabetes eat, what should people with type 1 eat, what should people with type 2 eat, what should I never eat? People are very confused about this, and it's understandable. There's so much in the media that is conflicting, or that says, you know, here's the absolute way to control your blood sugar all the time, and who does that work for? Does it work for anyone? So let's give you this next question to start with, Marina, and that is there any one diet that is great for everyone who has any kind of diabetes?
The billion-dollar question, right? What is the diet? What food will help me all the time? And unfortunately, there's not that single pill, right? The key is going to be moderation and variety. We've heard this over and over and over. And I want to say, there's no such thing as a diabetic diet, right? When we're newly diagnosed, whether it's type 1 or type 2, we say, oh, the diabetic food aisle, or the diabetic granola bar, the diabetic shake. We don't need that, right? We need a good variety of fruits, of vegetables, of lean protein, of whole grains. Yes, we need grains and are going to be carbohydrates. And that is what I want to maybe focus on, because in diabetes, carbohydrates is going to be the nutrient or the food group that's going to affect mostly your blood sugars, right? So carbohydrate convert 100% into blood sugar. So that's going to be the nutrient that's going to raise your blood sugars. So this could be in whole grains, this could be in milk, this could be in yogurt, in fruits, in certain types of starchy vegetables like potatoes, sweet potatoes and corn. So it's really the first step when we're either diagnosed as prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, or type 1, is going to be understanding, number one, what foods contain carbohydrates, right? What is a carbohydrate and what foods contain carbohydrates? Once we have this under our belt, we can go a little bit further and start maybe counting portions of carbohydrate. and understanding the amount on each food. And that's going to be different for everybody, right? So if I'm dealing with a toddler or if I'm dealing with an 80-year-old person, they're going to need different amount of calories, carbohydrates, and proteins. So really that's going to be an important aspect, that there's no one single diet, right? What works for your friend or your grandma is not going to work for you. So talking to a registered dietitian and maybe coming up with a realistic plan is going to be really, really helpful.
Fantastic advice. Lorena, I have the follow-up question for you, and that is, we had a number of people who I think probably have type 2 diabetes ask if the issue with type 2 diabetes is an inability to properly process carbohydrate for whatever reason, why are people with type 2 diabetes still told to eat carbohydrate as part of their diet? Lorena, what would you say to that?
I would say to that a diet requires some carbohydrate for different reasons. However, we are talking about a carbohydrate budget, not bankruptcy. So basically, you need to budget the carbohydrate, not bankrupt your diet of carbohydrates. So that's the difference. So when we're talking about why some carbohydrate needed, that is because some of the foods that have carbohydrate that Marina mentioned also have vitamins, minerals, fiber, antioxidants, and other nutrients that are vital to health. That's the reason why they come in a package. Because the goal of good diabetes management is to keep blood sugar levels as close to the healthy range as safely as possible, that allows us to continue eating those high nutrient, high value foods, but within a budget. And that budget is different for many different people. Like Marina said, if you're an adolescent and you are involved in sports and you're a 55-year-old woman who's mostly sedentary, their budgets are going to be different. So that's the key. Good nutrition and good management. That's why we say continue eating your carbs. Just be very mindful of what you eat. And I always say mind your P's and Q's when it comes to carbohydrate. P's for portion and Q for quality.
I love it. I love it. You know, I did a really long bike ride a few months ago, and I asked my diabetic dietitian for some tips on eating before this bike ride, before it happened. And I said, you know, the thing is that everyone else who's doing this bike ride is going to be carb loading for the week before the ride. They're going to be just pounding down the carbs. And of course, I can't carb load because I have diabetes and I try to eat really low carb. And she said to me, your body works the same way everybody else's body works. You need carbohydrates to do this ride. So we have to figure out how to manage your blood glucose and measure things and weigh things so that you can get the carbohydrate that you need and still have good blood sugar during the ride. So it turns out some parts of us work just the same as everybody else.
Right. It was just about budgeting. That's what I always say.
Exactly.
Find your budget.
Cool. So we had a question about triglycerides, and the question was, and Marina, I'll give this one to you. You're up next. What do triglycerides have to do with diabetes? Anything?
So triglycerides are usually the fats in the body and in the blood, and we're usually going to find them really high. In my experience, we see them really high when their blood sugars are really uncontrolled. So if your triglycerides are high, number one, it could be very dangerous for your heart health, and we know that heart health and cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer in the world, and also the #1 killer in people with diabetes. So we know it's particularly relevant for people that have diabetes. But it really tells us a relationship and how uncontrolled or how high your blood sugars have been. So we always like to keep control of your triglycerides and making sure that they're well controlled. And if they're really elevated and your blood sugars are also really elevated, then we need to really make changes and make sure we're giving you more insulin or more medications to really bring these down.
Right. And I also want to add that high triglycerides also is a sign of insulin resistance. Therefore, the one way to find out, of course, is through the results of your blood exam. And the goal is to keep triglycerides levels under 150 milligrams. And advice is to look at your carbohydrate intake, especially the added sugars or foods that have added sugars, meaning the not so healthy carbohydrate intake, and decreasing that. And also, it is important to exercise as well, and the carbohydrate budgeting piece, the not so good carbohydrate, the added sugars. And the added sugars are everywhere, sometimes in foods that we might not even think about.
Absolutely. The one that tends to get me is salad dressing. I think I'm having a salad. This is great for my diabetes. Turns out there's a lot of sugar in a lot of different kinds of salad dressing, folks.
Yeah. Or ketchup.
Ketchup. Condiments in general. Lots of salt, lots of sugar. So the next one, speaking of delicious, salty, sugary food, we had several people say, you know, it is really hard to make dietary changes, and I feel like there's a lot that I should be doing differently around my diet, but I kind of can't get myself to do it, or I do it at sort of half measures, and I'm sort of perpetually feeling like I'm letting myself down in terms of what I'm eating. Do you have any advice for folks who are struggling with their diet? And do you know of any resources where people can get further support and advice? And I'll give that one to you, Marina.
So when we hear the word diet, we're probably 50 to 80% less likely to succeed, right? So I loved when Lorena used this word diet, because we need to stop thinking about this as a diet, because diets reflect a restriction in your food, right? And we usually do them for short term, and it's not successful. So let's change that mindset and let's start thinking healthier habits or lifestyle or food choices, because when you start incorporating the foods that you love and making and working with those blood sugars, guess what? It's going to be attainable long term. So just because you were diagnosed with diabetes doesn't mean that you can't have rice or you can't have those potatoes or that pasta. You can continue having them, but it's going to be about the budget, right? It's going to be about the portion size and maybe changing the quantity or the quality. So for example, if before you were having regular pasta and maybe a whole bowl of 2 cups, well, with the help of a registered dietitian that has experience, we can maybe portion it to about a cup or the size of your hand, and maybe change it to whole wheat, which is going to be a lot more fiber. It's going to stabilize your blood sugars and maybe reduce those spikes and keep you full and satisfied. So you still had your pasta, you still enjoyed it, but it was a different way of incorporating those favorite foods that you love. And guess what? Your numbers could still be fabulous.
Fantastic. Lorena, I would love to hear from you on this as well, because, of course, you specialize in food from a variety of different cultural and ethnic cuisines. So I'm sure you have much to say on the topic of how to make adjustments to the foods that you love and maybe that you grew up with or that you're used to, so that they can potentially be a little bit more friendly to the blood glucose.
Yes, and I'm going to take advantage that I gave several classes in November because we were preparing for Thanksgiving, and most of the patients are of Hispanic descent, and they were thinking, what am I going to do? And now we also have the holiday seasons upon us. So basically my tips were as follows. try to stay true to the dishes that your family and you love and modify them to make it better. What are some of the modifications that could be found? Well, we found out that a lot of people did enjoy broccoli, so they were able to add that to many of their dishes to kind of reduce the amount of carbohydrate in other foods, such as rice, but not feel deprived. So add more vegetables to your favorite dishes. Whatever the protein food that you choose, try and make it as lean as possible. So whether it's the pork shoulder or the ham, just make it as lean as possible. And then I always say, start with the vegetable, whatever vegetable you enjoy. And many of them enjoy salads. Start with that and fill half of your plate with your favorite vegetables, regardless of country of origin. There's always a vegetable that someone likes. And then the other half of the plate, make sure that you have your lean protein, and then the other, that will be whatever carbohydrate of choice, whether it's rice, whether it's pasta, or any of the corn-based products like tamales or anything else. So it's mostly about the portion, and I always say that once you eat, move away from the table, because we eat with our eyes more than we eat with our stomachs. So when you are closely connected to foods, physically connected, your appetite is going to take over. So find healthy substitutions. So we were talking about flan, which is a favorite custard in Latin America. So I said, well, why not use lower fat milk? And then it's also about the portions or artificial sweeteners to the point that you still enjoy it. And if you're invited to someone's home, then bring a vegetable or a food that you have prepared. Therefore, you have that. And please don't go hungry to gatherings, because once you're hungry, you eat everything in sight.
Yeah.
It's true that willpower is so much more challenging, just as they say don't go grocery shopping with an empty stomach either.
Never.
Our willpower is just out the window once we're really hungry. Great tips. Our next question is about kids, so this seems like a perfect one for you, Marina. The question was from someone who said, if kids were taught more about nutrition and health in schools, do you think that they would be less likely to develop diabetes either while they're still kids or when they grow up?
I mean, obesity and type 2 diabetes in kids is such a complex issue, right? It's environmental, it's societal, right? The lack of time, the lack of physical activity, or the lack of space, parents working extra hours, and maybe choosing lower quality foods and more convenient foods, and definitely maybe the food choices at home or at school, and again, relying on heavier loaded carbohydrates or higher calorie, higher fat. So I think it's really very hard to just say it's all depending on the school, right? I think part of it could be great in terms of education. The more aware parents, school teachers, and everybody is about the risk factors of diabetes, the importance of really having those healthy habits from the get-go, we could do a lot to improve, right? And like I say, kids, how do we learn about habits? How did you learn about what to eat? Well, by what your parents did, right? If your parents always had veggies and fruits at home, I can guarantee you that when you're an adult, you're going to tend to gravitate towards those plates and towards those foods because you saw it constantly. So I think parents are going to be role models for that family structure and teaching them healthy kids and the importance of exercise, that we're not just going to be watching TV games, so you either choose swimming or basketball, or let's walk the dog. But it's going to be establishing those habits from the get-go and not just one person or the school or the parent or whomever, that we're going to see a really reduction in the incidence of type 2 diabetes in kids.
All right. So zipping through the questions. I see we only have 10 minutes left, and we have a lot more questions. So we had a lot of questions specifically about, when I eat this, my blood sugar does that. How come I can eat this food but not that food? So I want to kind of summarize those questions into what are the variety of factors that affect blood glucose that can cause things to be different on different days. Say you eat the same thing on 2 days and the result in your blood sugar is completely different. What are the variety of factors that affect it that can cause those seeming inconsistencies? And I want to give that one to Lorena.
Yeah, I attended a lecture, and I think that it was really very eye-opening that there are approximately 20 different factors that affect blood sugar levels. And I started thinking 20 different factors. And of course, I can't remember all 20, but it was eye-opening because many times when patients say, my blood sugar levels are all over the place, what is going on? I pretty much eat about the same things, and they're all over the place. So, and then I thought, wow, it's just 20 different things. So here are some that are off the top of my head. If you're a woman, your menstrual cycle affects your blood sugar levels at different times of the day. If you are sick, that also causes a change in your blood sugar levels. If you're under emotional stress, that's also another factor. How much insulin you have in your body. If you're still producing insulin, how much of that is available at a certain time of the day? How much physical activity have you done that day that it's different from the other day? There is also, what else are you eating? Are you eating more of the foods? We might eat the same things, but maybe I was eating a little bit more, and maybe that caused. What other things are you eating that may slow down the digestion of the carbohydrates? There might have been other foods in that meal that have fiber, and then that will have a different effect. Or some foods just are digested slower than other foods. So that, in essence, can give you an idea of all the different variables that can affect blood sugar levels, the medication as well. So, and even how you cook your foods sometimes. There is something called the glycemic load of foods. So one thing that I thought about was pasta, for example. And the more you cook your pasta versus pasta al dente, it might have a different impact on your blood sugar levels. So if you have pasta al dente one day, but maybe the next time that you ate it, you cooked it a little bit more. Or what about things that you add to foods? Things like vinegar, for example, might slow down the absorption of certain carbohydrates. So I am just throwing in so many different variables that really could take into account what blood sugar levels look like from one moment to the next.
Makes it so easy after all those 20 factors.
It's so given that, and I would add amount of sleep that you get. I notice that in my own blood sugar. The less sleep I get, the higher my blood sugar tends to be.
Yeah.
So
the hungrier you'll be, right?
Sorry, what did you say?
The hungrier you tend to be.
And you're hungrier. Where is the justice? My blood sugar is high, and I'm hungry. So with all of these factors involved, how on earth can anyone manage their blood glucose? This is the million-dollar question that we all have, and I think that really throughout this talk, you've both been talking about exactly this. How can we manage our blood glucose? Through figuring out what foods work for us, through figuring out what medications work for us. Another piece, a trend that a lot of people have who are insulin dependent, and maybe folks who are not insulin dependent as well, I have to confess I don't know this one, is to have high blood sugar first thing in the morning. And so we had a number of people ask, how come I can go to bed with a wonderful blood sugar. I can even test in the middle of the night and discover my blood sugar is still wonderful. And then when I wake up in the morning, a lot of the times it is high. Marina, let me give that one to you. What is that about?
So that could be something that's called the dawn phenomenon, and actually we can see it both in kids, adults, people that are on insulin, or people that have prediabetes.
Right.
So guess what happens during the middle of the night? Hormones are released, right? Whether we're growing, whether it could be your growth hormone, whether it could be estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, cortisol levels. So all of these beautiful balancing hormones, but at the same time, insulin-resistant hormones are being produced at dawn. And so it makes an entire sense why during the morning or fasting, our blood sugars sometimes are a little bit up, or we hear this term that we might need more insulin or more medication during the morning because of that so-called insulin resistance. So we could see it even in prediabetes or in abnormal glucose tolerance. That's why we're really looking into the fasting blood glucose levels, because during the night, it's not just about what you ate, but it could also be other factors that are, it could be your hereditary, it could be your hormones, it could be your stress level, all of these other factors that we're getting to know more of, that could be causing your blood sugars to go up. So if we're seeing this phenomenon, it could be very frustrating. We're going to bed at a great number and we wake up and we're high. We might need to increase our dosage of insulin or medications. And you know what also could really, really help, especially for people that are not on insulin, is to exercise. Because exercise is going to make those cells more receptive towards that insulin, and it's going to make that insulin work better. So those numbers are going to be better off if you do a little bit of resistance training, if you're walking or exercising the night before. Try it out, and maybe you'll see a difference.
Yeah. And I also want to add the Somoji effect, in which there are also higher blood sugar levels in the morning, and that is a result when blood sugar levels may drop during the night, so the body responds by releasing other hormones to increase those blood sugar levels. And by doing that, the blood sugar levels start to increase, and they continue to increase. So that's also another condition mostly found when people use insulin. So pay attention to that, and a way to actually find out if your blood sugar levels are dropping, and that's why your body responds by producing or releasing more glucose into the body, is by checking your blood sugar levels at dawn or 4 o'clock in the morning to find out if they are low.
Great information. Now we are pretty much out of time, and I'll tell you guys the whole category of questions that we didn't have time to get to was diabetes-related complications. And this, we could do several live interviews just on this topic. There were a lot of questions about what are the potential complications of diabetes, what causes them, how long do you have to have diabetes before you develop complications. There's a lot to learn and understand about that. So I want to tell folks who ask those questions, because we don't have time to answer them right now, on to diabetes, in our forum section, we have an entire category called complications, where people are discussing these exact questions and what they have learned in their own research and their own experience about them. And so in conclusion, for you guys, I would love for each of you, Marina and Lorena, to share just a few resources that you would suggest to people who still have questions about diabetes, websites you think are good, publications you think are good. Marina, let's start with you.
So definitely American Diabetes Association has wonderful different types of resources. One of them is also, even for Spanish speaking, that it's Choose Your Plate, and it allows you to maybe start practicing with some of the things that we talked about at half of your plate, being veggies, the wrestling protein and starch. So it makes it more realistic. Definitely eatright.org, which is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, has fabulous resources, recipes, and really other dietetic professionals that we can help. For type 1s, definitely the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation or Children's with Diabetes are two fabulous really support groups that families can really start networking. So those are a few, but I imagine there's millions more, and maybe we can put them along on the website.
Okay, and I'm just going to add one more since Marina took the 3 top ones that I was going to share, but I love her, so it's okay. And that is the National Diabetes Education Program, NDEP. They also have a lot of resources in English and in Spanish that are accessible to many people who want to learn more.
Fantastic. You guys are awesome. I'm going to kick the camera over to Victoria Wales at USAGov to close this up for us. But first, I want to thank the two of you, Marina and Lorena, for being here, for your fantastic answers, for sharing your information and your time and your enthusiasm, which you got a number of comments in our chat room about how much people loved your approach and your attitudes and your enthusiasm. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And thank you to the attendees who have all been listening and learning along with us today. And now, finally, to Victoria to close us up. Thank you so much, Victoria.
Thank you all for sharing such wonderful wealth of information. I think you shared a lot of things that people will find very beneficial and certainly to share with each other. Part of the campaign was to encourage people to access these resources that are available to them, of course, and certainly to support one another. So before we completely disconnect, I wanted to take a quick minute to invite you to visit USA.gov, where you can find information on many topics, from health insurance, benefits, money, taxes, and education topics. And if you prefer the information in Spanish, you can always visit gobiernousa.gov, and you can also contact us via phone at 1-844-872-4681, which is again 1-844-USA-GOV1, or email us or on chat, both in English and in Spanish, and you can subscribe to receive email updates and connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter. And until next time, thank you so very much for sharing this campaign with us and with our audiences.
Thank you. Happy Thursday, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.